Well, good evening, everybody. As I was graciously introduced, my name is Tony Sollars. I'm the CTO of a cybersecurity and IT managed services firm over here in the United States called Roland Schorr Tower. We're headquartered out of Honolulu, Hawaii. That's where we started, but we have since branched over into Seattle, and we have an office in Phoenix and Flagstaff, Arizona, and also an office in Oregon. We basically are become the IT department for many companies, and I've been in IT for 25 years. I've worked for Microsoft. I've worked for Boeing. I've worked for some large trucking companies. You might have heard of them, Kenworth, Peterbilt trucks. So that's where I got a lot of my experience working with computer systems and information and data security. So I'm hoping that the purpose of today is I'm hoping I can educate everyone here a little bit, and we can share. So if you have questions, please, feel free to jump in and ask them. The purpose and my goal and my hope today is to help everyone in this room to protect where the offices that you work in, and the homes and the computers and the devices that you use every day. The hackers and the what we call threat actors out there, they're becoming more organized every day and becoming much more intelligent and much more sharpened in what they do. And so we need to do the same and work together. So next slide. So you can skip this one. So how bad can a ransomware attack be for a small business? I mean, nowadays, a small business, it's just as bad for small business as it is for large businesses. I mean, even more so, a larger business can make it through a ransomware attack, where a small business can get completely shut down and won't have the financial backing or maybe even the cyber insurance that a large company would, or even a medium-sized company. And we get asked this question a lot, can I just get cyber insurance to protect me? Well, as we all know, with insurance companies, the underwriters have figured out how to not pay out on these cyber claims. And so you can't just get a cyber insurance policy and be negligent in your security. Because if you've ever bought cyber liability insurance, there's a questionnaire now that goes with it. And if you haven't done some due diligence to protect your data and your networks, then they'll find a way to not pay out that claim. And it's starting to happen. So next slide. So ransomware's had a pretty big year this last year. It's been reported by multiple agencies since the COVID era has started. We've seen a 450% increase in the number of ransomware emails and hacking threat attacks. The world shut down. The world went home and worked from home. We took workers out of secured office network environments and sent them home to their sons and daughters' Xbox networks that were highly insecure, and all the threat actors know it. And so they amped up their efforts, and it has shown in the last year. The number of attacks, the number of successful breaches have increased. Even the year before COVID happened, ransomware was on the rise. We've seen it exponentially go this year. In 2018, these numbers are from 2019. So just in 2019, we saw upwards of $75 billion in downtime. That doubled last year in 2020. So you can go to the next slide. So this is kind of an infographic that talks about the year, like how businesses are targeted by malware in the small business market. And so 61% of businesses were, out of all the small businesses in the United States, reported that they were hit by a virus of some kind. And 54% were hit by some kind of adware on their computer. And 46% were spyware, and 20% 29% some kind of crypto jacking. And if you don't know what crypto jacking is, that's some kind of, it's like a piece of spyware that it gets installed on your machine that actually does crypto mining in the background using the resources of your computer without your knowledge or permission. Next slide. So the purpose of this slide is to show that a large percentage of businesses are getting infected with something. It's the idea that it hasn't happened to me or it won't happen to me mentality is kind of a thing of the past. 67%, and that number has now increased to 72% since this survey was done. 72% of all viruses, malware, spyware, etc., are getting into our company environments and our personal devices through email. We've all seen them, right? Phishing emails, spear phishing emails, click, all the things that, they always say, don't click on the link, right? Don't open the attachment if you don't know who it's coming from. But people do. People always do. And they know, and threat actors know this. That's why they continue to do it. And so there's lots of different solutions and ways to protect your company environments to help stop or at least thwart or reduce the number of emails that are getting through that have these kinds of risks attached to them. You've got to have good education in your companies. You got to be training your people. You can put all the security in the world on your systems, but all it takes is one person to click a link and it's over. And so training your people to not click on things and to look at things in more detail is more beneficial than putting layers and layers and layers and layers of security on everything, which is still important too. Go on to the next slide. So just to kind of summarize that last slide, we have phishing and ransomware and viruses are getting in through email. Weak passwords is another large percentage of breaches. I mean, look at the SolarWinds hack attack that happened. I'm sure most of us have heard of the news how SolarWinds was breached. So some insider, not really inside knowledge, but I've read all the articles. The whole reason why SolarWinds was breached in the first place, why they were even the hackers even got into their systems, is they had a server sitting on their network that was exposed to the internet with an account that had a password of password 123. In today's age, you can't do that because it's not a human. A hacker's not a human being out there trying to hack into your systems. They have programs that are running 24/7, looking for ways in all the time. It's doing it while you're sleeping, and they know every combination of every possible password and passphrase that every human being would think of. That's easy. So the next thing is, how do we stop this? Like we know the scary stuff, we know what we shouldn't do. We've read the reports, we've seen the education material, but how do we stop them? Well, the first thing is to have good perimeter security, right? We need to have good next generation firewalls that are systems. We need to utilize VPNs correctly. Don't expose our internal systems directly to the internet. And then utilize a new protection system called DNS Protection. And this really is effective against thwarting ransomware. And what DNS does everybody know what DNS is?
I think it's probably safe to say that this group probably has an understanding of what DNS does, but okay. I don't know what DNS protection is, so I'd like to hear.
Okay, so when I try to explain DNS to people who don't understand technology too well, it's kind of like an address book, right? DNS is that Yellow Pages phone book of when I need to look up a phone number or I need to look up an address of a business. I can't just give you a business name and expect to find the address. But if I go to the phone book, I can tell you the name of the business, and it gives me the address of the business. And that's kind of what DNS does. It gives me the physical address of the device with just the name of the device. What DNS protection does is we use DNS to look up things all over the world, but there's not really any security built into DNS. It was never designed with security in mind back in the 70s. And so with DNS protection is it puts a filter or a proxy in front of that request. When we go to say, hey, I need you to look up this server on the internet or this on the network, it puts a filter through that to say, yeah, I know what that server is or that IP is. You're not allowed to actually look that up. I'm going to block it. And so what DNS protection does is it keeps a list of known IP ranges or address ranges, host names that the security, the companies out there know belong to threat actors. And so there actually is quite an extensive list, and it's updated on a regular basis. And it also looks at content, so you can it looks at the content of, what you're requesting. So if you need to, in your company, you need to block playboy.com or, anything with the word, XXX in it, you can do that also with DNS protection. I use it in my house with my kids. I have it pretty locked down, so they can't accidentally see something they're not. You could even take it as far as filtering out YouTube searches. So next slide. This is a big one, and it appalls me that we still come across clients and businesses that still do this. But there's this idea of being able to have remote desktop, where you can remote desktop into another machine from another machine, usually on Windows. It's called RDS or terminal services. It's when companies expose this from the internet, where you don't need a VPN. You can just go home and terminal server, remote desktop directly into the server or a machine over the internet. Very bad idea. You're just asking to be hacked. If you haven't been hacked, you're lucky, because there are scripts and crawlers out there looking actively for this, and nothing that you can do will protect you. Changing the port, anything like that, that's all been thought of and failed. So the best thing I can say is you need to, block this on your firewalls and have a proper VPN in place. Next slide. Good endpoint security is super important. I'm sure we all have this stuff. I just bring it up as just to check the box. This is antivirus, right? Your McAfee's, your Norton antiviruses. But we take it a step further. We've moved into what we call next generation endpoint security, or what they call EDR. We use SentinelOne ourselves, but there's some other ones out there called Cylance, which is a really great one. Carbon Black, and Huntress Labs is also another great one. And what makes these things different than the traditional, what I call signature-based antivirus platforms, is the way I explain signature-based antiviruses and why they don't work is, say you're a security guard at a football game, and your job is to find the man wearing a red coat and a yellow hat. He's the threat actor, right? And so you're watching a group of like 1,000 people, and your job is to spot the person wearing the red hat, the red jacket, and the yellow hat. He's the bad guy. Pretty easy in a C. I mean, it's not super easy, but if you've got a keen eye and training, you can do that. You can filter out everybody else and find the person wearing the red jacket and the yellow hat. Well, what if that threat actor that's wearing, who we're going to call the virus, is trained now, and it's become sophisticated enough where he doesn't just have a yellow hat. He has a yellow hat, a red hat, a blue hat, a green hat, and a black hat. And every 10 seconds, he changes the color of his hat. And he changes the color of his jacket every 5 seconds. How do you find him then? Well, this is what modern viruses and ransomwares do. And that's why signature-based antivirus doesn't work, because the viruses change their signatures and their profiles every couple of seconds, so they can't be detected. And that's why we've moved into next generation antivirus that doesn't look at the type of the file, they look at the behavior of what the file is doing. So next slide. So I can't sit here and report to you that 72% of all viruses and hack attacks come in through email without saying that a way to stop them, you got to have great email security. So every one of our companies should have some kind of filtering for our email, in both inbound and outbound. It should be looking at spam. It should be looking at ransomware, viruses, and all those things. And I'm sure most of us have them. If we don't, you should be getting it and managing it. So I'm not going to say too much about this. I think this is pretty standard in most of our industries. Some of the top probably ones out there are going to be Barracuda, Mimecast, Proofpoint are some of the vendors that are the top three in the industry right now. Next slide. Well, security updates, the most favorite topic of all the radio operators. Got to patch those Windows machines. Typically, where we find where an infection gets into a Windows machine is because it wasn't patched. I would say at least 80% of the time where a machine was exposed and got breached, it's because there was actually a patch that fixed that breach, and it just wasn't patched. But I know in the radio and television industry, there are many, many situations where you've got machines that are many operating system versions older, running software that isn't supported on newer stuff and just can't be patched or are isolated now. And so this is I know a constant problem for your industry that takes a specialist to kind of figure out how to manage and create exceptions for. So the important thing for every business, no matter what your industry issues are, is how often are you patching? Do you have a policy? And is it automated? And do you have reporting? So my biggest takeaway for here is just to have a policy in place of some kind. So there's at least an understanding and some kind of reporting. So next slide. And security awareness training, super crucial. Like I said before, you can have all the security in place and devices and software, but all it takes is one person to click on something and it's over. So educating your people, educating your employees on how to identify a phishing email is very crucial. Go ahead next to the next slide. I'm just going to talk briefly a little bit about backups. I always say this: it's not a matter of if you're going to suffer a ransomware attack or a virus infection. It's when. It's not the days of skating through, the decade and it's never going to happen are over. They're getting more sophisticated. So having great backups and even taking it a step further, not just backups, but a full business continuity disaster plan is very important. So a full disaster plan is part of your backup and recovery. That your backup and recovery should be looking for ransomware, should be off-site, so that if you do get infected, it doesn't affect your backups. And how fast can you recover if you're infected or you're down? And then it should include things about the business too, a step-by-step of what to do in the case of a disaster, like emergency call lists, which vendors should you have a contact list, and have a complete plan in place. Because if you have a disaster or a full ransomware attack, you don't want to be figuring these things out in the moment, because it's going to be chaos. Next slide. You can skip this one. So that's kind of the end of the slides that I have. I was going to talk a little bit more about phishing emails, and we were talking before the call started about how to identify phishing emails, and I thought I would kind of share some of that a little bit with the whole group. So the easiest way when you get an email, and I'm sure all of us have gotten these, either we get an email that looks like it's coming from someone we know, but the content looks legit, but something's not right, or it comes from I've gotten ones from myself to myself. I'm like, why did I send myself an email requesting a transfer of funds? In any way, whatever the subject of the email is, the easiest way to thwart or figure out whether it's legitimate is to look at who the email address is coming from. Who's the from, right? You can hover over the name and look at the email address and read that and say, do I even recognize that email address? Or does it look like some kind of weird something at Gmail or some odd looking email address? That's the first thing. And then you can look through the content of the email, and a lot of times they'll have a link to click on. You can hover over that and look at the email link and see where it takes you. So if it's an email for like, click on this to reset your password for Netflix, well, great. It probably should be sending you to netflix.com, right? But if you hover over that button or that link and you read that path, or the URL path, you'll notice that it doesn't actually send you to netflix.com, but they're real sneaky. It'll be like netflix.com, or it'll be US, or it'll be like netflix.something.com, right? So they'll try to trick you into thinking you'll see the Netflix in there, but it'll be to another domain. And most layman people don't understand what that means, so they'll click on it. But that's what you have to look for. If you're going to go, if it's a Netflix email, it should always be netflix.com. If it's a Microsoft email, it'll always be microsoft.com. Otherwise, it's not legitimate. That's all I got today. I mean, a little bit about us. You know, I kind of described what we are and what we do, but we always throw out an offer when we do these talks with the radio and television groups. Is if something I said kind of piqued your interest or scared the heck out of you, and you're like, hey, I'm not sure we're there on that, or I'd like to know more, we offer a free assessment. It's a no commitment, 30-minute call that just go over. If you just need education, I'd be glad to have that conversation with you. I'd rather steer you and point you in the right direction than leave you wondering. So these are some of the services that we do offer. Like I said, we do a full IT managed services where we become your IT department. We also do co-managed IT, where we partner with your IT department and assist them and help them wherever we can. And we do backup. We provide backups and business continuity planning. We do have a help desk. We do cybersecurity planning and assistance with like firewalls and network security monitoring, and then assistance where it's needed. We can help do an assessment and figure out what needs to be improved. Or if you just have a project that needs some assistance with, we do project consulting. We do a lot of cloud migrations. So I'll leave it at that and take any questions that you have.
Yeah, it's a great presentation. It resonates completely with what we're living day to day in the broadcast, business. So I open it up to our members here to see if there was anything that resonated with you that you wanted to know a little more about.
Conrad, I wanted to throw out another question too to everybody on this call. Who's experienced a cyber attack, and what was your follow through?
Salem had one last year, big one.
I worked at a small broadcaster. We wound up getting a Bitcoining machine put on our main server. The only way we caught it was it screwed up our automated weather downloads.
I got hacked before. Say attack on the EC2 instance. We had ransomware attack. The security rules were not set up properly, and they left the the RDP port, as he alluded to earlier, wide open, and that's how we got attacked. So I agree 100% with what he said.
Yeah. Yeah, we just implemented a new tool into our cyber tool set for clients that use our monitoring service, where we do support for and such. Our agent goes out on all the workstations and servers and stuff that keep everything patched and monitored and up to date. And it also monitors for ransomware. And if for some reason that one device gets ransomware ever gets detected, it actually will alert back into our system and to the client, and then take that device offline so it can't spread immediately.
Hey, Tony, we have a couple of questions in the chat. I'll read them out to you. This one is from Sean. He wants to know, how do you feel about WatchGuard Firebox firewalls? One of the best? ?
Yeah, they make good firewalls for small business. I wouldn't say they're good for large businesses, even though I'm sure they would argue that point with me. But we use Sonic walls ourselves. We do Sonic walls and Meraki's. But we also have some clients with Juniper and with Palo Altos. For larger customers, Palo Altos are really nice firewalls. But we have a handful that use WatchGuards. They're headquartered right here in Seattle, where I live. I'm a big. They're really easy to administrate and understand. And the only thing I don't like about WatchGuards is their VPN. I'm not too fond of.
Okay, another question coming in from John. I recently noticed agent log text files in one of our machines. Is this something that might indicate malicious remote access?
Depends on where you found it. So I would say, one of the things I always look for when I'm doing an audit is extraneous files being written to the root of the C drives. But what you'll notice is ransomware and threat actors and stuff are actually kind of clean up after themselves. If they don't want to be found, you won't find anything. What we're seeing, and this is we did a webinar event on cybersecurity with the U.S. Secret Service last October, and they educated us on this. Is when your systems get breached, they're actually not planting ransomware right away and attacking. They're laying in wait and watching and collecting as much information as they can, and what they call that is dwell time. And the dwell time has increased from a couple of years ago from 30 days to now like almost 6 months. Because the goal of threat actors is not to induce damage. They don't really want to inflict damage on your environment. They want money. And so they want to collect as much valuable information as they can to get as much money as they can. And so that's the change in behavior that we've seen in the last couple of years.
All right, we got a question from Jeff Williams regarding remote desktop software as a big hole for security. What do you recommend for being able to remote control a machine off-site?
So there's a couple different solutions, right? You can implement VPN through the firewall, right? And set up zones so that you connect with a VPN. And then from the VPN, then you can remote desktop to those devices. If that's not something that is feasible, then you can use software like Splashtop Enterprise, which requires two-factor authentication, and it puts an agent on the server in the network, and then you install it on the device that's remote, and then you're really protected about what gets in. And there's some other solutions out there too, but Splashtop Enterprise is a really good one. It's because it's really well protected. Screen Connect is another one that we use. For larger environments, we've recently been setting up, because of the whole work from home and the COVID stuff, we've been building some Windows virtual desktop environments in Azure. And we've also been setting up RDS terminal server farms. So like a pair of remote desktop service servers for people to remote into and work remotely.
All right, we got a question from William. Is it dangerous to hit forward on an email to reveal the sender address?
In general, no. But that would be something that would pertain to your own security policies at the company you work at. So I know at like most companies that would probably be a no to that response. But I've worked a lot of contract because I have secret clearance. I've done a lot of DoD contracts, and doing that exact thing would be a breach of policy to anybody outside of the organization. You would have to create a new email.
One little added note I might apply to that. If you're using a Microsoft Office environment, particularly Office 365, there are little add-ins that will allow you to examine the header. If you're not, there are still third-party applications that will analyze the header information of the message without you doing anything with it. It will show you the from and the to, and all of the server hops that the message made, which will show you where it actually came from, and a number of other details, which you can get pretty much free.
He's right.
So is this part of Microsoft Windows 10, or is this a third-party download?
Well, whenever I receive an email from somebody, and if that email has been passed, 3 or 4 times, replies and forwards, because I have a email background, I can pull the headers out of the email and just read them, and I know the exact adventure that email took, and every server it's touched, and every email address it's been replied and forwarded from in that chain. So if you don't want someone to be able to do that, my recommendation would be to just create a new email.
Okay, from Frank, what do you think about using virtual machines? Oracle has one that runs on Windows 10 as a place to do risky internet operations.
So that machine would have, you just have to make sure you configure it properly. So when you build like a virtual environment like that with what do they call that, something box, the one from Oracle, virtual box. You build it in what they call a NAT, or virtual, I think we call it a proxy or a NAT mode or something. And what it does is it makes sure that virtual machine doesn't sit on the same network as your computer. Because if that's the case, then it can't communicate. If it gets infected, then it won't try to infect everything else. Right? We do that. We call those like a sandbox environment. If we need to click a link or do something like that, we actually have a couple of virtual machines set up in a sandbox like that. We just do it in Azure in a hosted environment. And then if it blows it up or freaks it out, then we just reboot it and it returns it back to default state. And you could do the same thing with VirtualBox.
Okay, from Scott, what is a good way to approach management who might understand or consider cybersecurity a high priority amid a downturn in revenue?
I would say it's best to come at them with hard numbers. So look at some of the slide decks that I'd be glad to share my slide deck. You could take some of the statistics that I've shared with you and get together with a vendor to help maybe gather a few more bullet points, and try to extrapolate that and associate to that your own internal problems that you've been having and or could have. And what I always find when trying to spend money to save the possibility of future money and saving it is you've got to figure out what those soft and hard costs are, to say, here, we should spend money on this thing and see if there's a way to spend money on a cybersecurity solution that can help replace something you've already got. That kind of, if you can find something in a solution that gives you something extra that replaces something that you've already got, so that it's not a full extra spend on something, but then gives you some of those extra cybersecurity things that you're looking for. Does that make sense?
Yes. Michael asks, is there any particular software that you would recommend for protecting Windows 7 machines now that Microsoft no longer provides security updates?
I don't know of any special software other than the standard, good antivirus for it. What we've been doing as an IT company is we have a few customers that still have them around for specific purposes, as we've been isolating them onto their own VLAN. So while they still need to be accessible, we found that they don't really need to be accessible by other machines. They just need to be able to access the internet or maybe one other machine. And so we isolate them onto their own network. So the idea is that these machines are more risky. It doesn't mean you have to shut them off. It just means you need to come up with an exception and a risk policy around them, and control control the risk for the things that you can control. Because you can't shut them down, you can't get rid of them, but there's things you can do to reduce the risk for them, and that is control the network that they exist on, so that if something does happen to them, and so that access from the internet can't directly access that Windows 7 machine. So if I was a hacker and I breached your network coming from the internet or some other device on the network, I can't directly find that Windows 7 machine with one of my scans because it's sitting on an isolated network.
Okay, question from Sean. Do you take out a lot of video camera systems and NVRs that were made in China with the design in firmware vulnerability?
We don't. We don't really work in that space at all. But we do work a lot with, if you've ever heard of Ubiquity or Unify, that product space offering. The company is called Ubiquity. They make several different product lines, and one of them has the ability to do security cameras. So we've had a couple of customers ask about that, and so we use their wireless access points and their switches for some small customers, and their security camera and protection product ties right into those switches, and the same controller software that drives the whole network can be integrated with the security cameras. But we don't physically install those cameras at all. We kind of stick with what we're good at, and it isn't really security cameras.
Speaking of what you're good at, we've got a couple of requests for your contact information.
Sure. It's on that last slide.
Which I'll share that again.
And
I'll post it in chat.
And yeah, that'd be great. And we're going to have this video posted as soon as I can edit it, which is great when you listen to it and you hear me saying I'll post this video as soon as I edit it, but we'll put the contact information next to it as well.
And there it is up on the screen, Jeff. All right.
Any other last questions? Going once, going twice? Great questions so far.
Great presentation. Yeah.
Those are some great questions.
Really good topic. Very timely. I think everybody on this call, this hits everybody.
Yeah, we did a a similar same topic for the SBE group over in Portland last month, and there was a gentleman on that call who worked for a radio television station, the television station, and they had gotten hit with the ransomware in 2020, and it took them down for a week. All their servers were down, and it was a situation where they just didn't have the proper security, and it was RDP. The RDP port was open on the firewall, and that's how they got in. And they didn't have antivirus on everything, and it was a budget thing for years where they talked about it. But man, they spent so much. And this will help the person who asked the question: how do you talk to management about when you have a downturn and about spending money? Is they spent so much money hiring a firm to come in and fix it and get everything back up, and then spent even more money to quickly get things secured, that it was astronomical. Like if they would have just put the proper security in place before, it would have saved them a lot.